Good afternoon. This is going to be almost the opposite of the person who spoke just before, who I thought was extremely interesting, but who was actually a bit more corporate than I would ever wish to be. So this is largely about how do you go from doing a job which I was originally doing, which is teaching, to selling books, in my case, into America and around the world, so that those books are actually described as the Harry Potter of the reference world. Now, you're not going to have heard of me or the books, but that doesn't mean to say that what we do doesn't get noticed. It just gets noticed in a completely different way. The way that it gets noticed is because what we do is what somebody said to me a long time ago, which was extremely valuable, and they said, do essential, do boring. And I hope I don't do the boring, but I am sure we do the essential. What we do is information books, but what I wanted to do was to explain how we got to where we are. At the moment, we've just trebled the size of our stand here this year. We've also increased the amount of effort we're putting into our overseas markets. So how does that come about, and how do you get to a position where things happen? And the answer to that is really not very easily. So I, last night, sort of sat there and thought, how did it all start? And it might be most useful, especially for people who want to do things on their own, if they knew how it all goes wrong and how you learn by it and how you put it right. So a little bit of bearing of soul as to the past. I was teaching for 20 years when I decided to move to work outside of teaching. I don't think I call it industry, it's just working outside of teaching. So what were my skills when I did that? Well, I was a teacher, and that's not what you think to be terribly useful in doing anything else. And I was completely wrong, but it took quite a long time to discover that. Then what else did I know about business and how to handle finance, how to go overseas, to do anything else? And the answer was I started out knowing absolutely nothing at the age of 30 and quite a lot. So this is starting from scratch, changing career, and then thinking, whoops, how do I actually cope with this? So let me just tell you about a couple of contacts that I started with. The advantage that I got is that while I was teaching, I was a writer, and I am a natural writer. That's what I do, and that's what the company is still based on. So I got that advantage, but I thought, oh, it would be good if you go into something which is more popular, because the world out there doesn't do narrow things like teaching. It does broad things like popular things that everybody's heard of. And so I had to go at that, and that was a complete and unmitigated disaster, because there are other people out there who are far better at doing that than I would ever be. And it took somebody to come along quietly and say, no, 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 that's not what you should be doing. What you should be doing is capitalizing on your strengths. Now, I know everybody thinks that's obvious, but it's not obvious to you when you're trying to start out. You need to try and figure out what your strengths are, and usually it's somebody else who tells you. It's usually not yourself who knows that. So that was where I started, trying to do something that didn't work. And in the middle of all this, I happened to meet, which is where the contact sort of thing comes in from, I happened to meet the managing director of Macmillan Education. One of the ways you meet people, of course, is walking around here and hoping they won't all ignore you. And certainly I don't ignore anybody when they turn up at our booth nowadays, because I know what it's like to start out doing that sort of thing. The managing director of Macmillan Education happened to be on the stand, and I happened to say what I did, and he said, no, you want to do textbooks, that's what you write, do textbooks. But did you realize that textbooks mostly only sold in this country? Some will sell in other British-based countries, but did you know that if you wrote information books, which are like textbooks but changed in their orientation a little bit, then everybody buys those from all over the world. So why don't you write some information books for me, and I will sell them round the world for you, actually for us, and you will get the royalty. But it was an amazing thing to learn. That is, a small change in what you do, from teaching to writing information books, means that the market opportunities that you've got around the world change dramatically. Now, if you go and have a look at our stand, which is right by the main entrance, you'll see that we are showcasing our textbooks because the audience here is mostly UK teachers. But this morning, the Minister of Education for Vietnam came past, and they're redoing their curriculum in science, and he needs somebody who has produced the entire science course and can do it in hardback. And he just turned up. I wasn't expecting him. He just turned up. And I can do all of that. We do 37 books in hardback for developing world markets and other places in multiple languages. They are effectively textbooks with a twist. So the jump between what I thought I could do and what skills I had, and actually learning that there were slightly different skills which had enormous difference in terms of what you could do overseas, was actually quite dramatic, and thanks to Macmillan Education for starting that. But as you might imagine, as an author, I was already sort of indebted to all sorts of publishers like Longman, now Pearson, and other people, and you sort of get to the feeling that you quite like to do this for yourself rather than to do it for other people, because then you don't have to ask quite the same way. Can I do this, or would this work, and so on. Because their problem is obviously making sure that they don't go bankrupt, whereas they don't care whether I go bankrupt, and so long as I don't mind, then it's a lot more independent. So after about a year or two of working on these information books, this is myself and somebody else who was having a go at doing it, we'd actually accumulated 24 books, which is not very many, as I'll explain later on. But we got them, and so we had a track record, and so we could do something with them. And I had always watched Tom Peters. I don't know if you know Tom Peters, who's the sort of business guru from the States. And he said something, very straightforward. He said, I get paid an enormous amount of money for going somewhere and giving a lecture, and I say, make things that work, service them properly, and you get stinking filthy rich. And I thought, that's good. I'll never go at that. I'll see if I can do that. But then he was just reporting on other people doing it, not doing it himself, although he did become stinking filthy rich, explaining that other people. So I thought, well, we'll have a go at that. It's a bit harder. You discover that Macmillan Education really were doing something useful. They had all the contacts, all the offices and everything else. And so you had to start all that for yourself. It's the case that if you do information books in this country just for the UK market, you will go bankrupt. There is no way you can do education books in this country for just the English education market. I know it looks big, but it's not big enough for the capital costs that go into publishing. So I had to learn that. And once I'd learned that, I thought I'd try co-editions of my own. So this is a description of how I eventually found out how to do that, and then how to get into the American and all the other markets that we're now in. I like going to America, but it's no good going to America to find people who are going to sell your books. It doesn't work. You don't find them. Because most of the people that you would find in America normally are people who always stay in America and want to be in America and don't necessarily want to be involved with people from overseas. But there are places where people do go out of America and where they are completely different. And in my particular case, the obvious place to go for that was the Frankfurt Book Fair. So instead of going to America, I went to Frankfurt. And I went to Frankfurt and walked round and up and down until I tried to find all of those people who had some product which looked vaguely similar to mine. And then I discovered that most of those people don't want my books because they've got products which are vaguely similar to mine. So what I discovered was that you need somebody who is excellent at selling, but who doesn't have any books that are very similar to yours, but who would like to. And they don't advertise that very well. You have to find out gently who those are. And I'm going to tell you exactly who they are because it's central to what it is. As I walked up and down and round and eventually sort of poked my nose in everywhere and said, excuse me, do you know who might want to do this, and feeling terribly small and terribly lonely walking around. If you've been to Frankfurt, you'll know they have 8,000 booths. So it makes this look like a duck pond. And you wonder if you're ever going to get anywhere. And I poked my head into one booth, and it was called Grolier. Grolier are an encyclopedia company, and they are the sort of second to Encyclopedia Britannica. They work largely in America. They're a selling machine. They do their own encyclopedias, but other than that, they're a selling machine, subsequently taken over by Scholastic. But at the time, who were actually part of Lagardère Group, just showed you how complicated this is, who, amongst other things, make tanks and machine guns. So it's actually quite difficult to figure out who it is that's trying to sell product that they haven't got that you might have. But as with all the others, I went along and said, this is what we've got, what I've got. And he said that this was the vice president of publishing. He said, well, look, we've got a specialized division. And that specialized division is about selling sets of books. Can you sell sets of books? And I said, well, we do sell via Macmillan sets of information books. He said, I do information books. What have you got? And I said, well, we've done these. He said, I don't know about those. He said, can you do me 25 science books in 6 months? And I said, yes, of course. Not having the faintest idea how to do 26 science books when we'd only ever done 24 in our entire existence previously. And he said, fine, because they need to be done for the elementary school market. And we happen to have a system of selling them through libraries, which is sort of what you heard before, but in a completely different direction. And then he said, well, of course, you'll do them in American library binding, won't you? And I said, yes. And I'd never heard of American library binding. So having said that, he said, right, you'll get a contract in the post. And when I picked myself up off the floor of that, I then had to move into a completely different set of contacts. Now, it had taken about 2 years of walking round and hard slog to get to that position. So I now had an export market which was far bigger than the British market ever could be, was terribly reliable, and I didn't want to screw it up because it was never going to happen again. And not at that scale, because at the time Grolier were number one in the reference market. But I really hadn't heard of them. Of course, I'd heard of them a little bit later, and when you go to find out what they are, they had a turnover of 300 million, and it was all in this specialized set market. They didn't do anything else but sets. So the next thing that I had to do was to find people who could supply me with American library binding books. There are actually 6 in the world. And I was amazed. I mean, I thought there'd be thousands, but there aren't. A tiny number. They're in Singapore, Hong Kong, and America. And nobody else wants to know about American library binding because they stitch it about ½ an inch in from the edge of the book, which means that when you open it, the book snaps back at you, and everybody else calls it a rat trap binding. But American libraries like it because it makes the books last longer. So it was clearly my job to make sure I could do that. And so I had to go wandering around then finding printers who could do it. And the way that I did that was to get a printer's agent, because there are people who work on behalf of printers and who understand what's going on. And one of the best people in the world that I ever met was a printer's agent. I don't use them now, but at the time, a printer's agent could tell you, yes, we know about American library bindings. We have someone who does that. We will actually tell you what you need to do. We will tell the person I was working with, who was a designer, what to do, how to put it together, and we'll get it done for you. So your only job now is to produce 25 books from scratch in 6 months. And our company is very small. I have to just say, our company is very small. It is still very small. I enjoy working small. I'm a niche sort of person, and I'm not a corporate person. But I don't mind working with corporations, although that tends to be a bit on the hard work side. So to begin with, we managed to get this printer's agent and the printer, and that meant that what I then had to do was put the books together. But we could do that. We had to go and get photographs taken, we had to sort all the content out and do it, but we managed to do that. So we got a foot in the door, but it wasn't going to stay a foot in the door if we didn't manage to carry on with that. So what I next decided that I needed to do is to become visible, because you're not visible if you're walking around to other people's booths saying, hello, it's me, I've got these books, would you like them? What you need are other people to come past you saying, hello, I've got these books, would you like them? And printers to come by saying, hello, we're printers, we do American library binding, and things like this. So the next thing that I did, and it's still not in America, the next thing I did was to rent a booth at Frankfurt and put up all the books in all the languages that we eventually did, but originally it was just in English, now it's lots. But I put them all up because people going past would say, oh yes, that's our market, we'll at least call by and we'll talk to them. And so that's what happened. People came and talked to them. Lots of printers came and talked to us, which was important. Illustrators came to talk to us, which was important. And we got to know people that way. And at the same time, which is very important for what you might be wanting to know, we actually met a huge number of really nice publishers from around the world who wanted to have information books, but who couldn't afford to have them on their own. That is, the American market provides you with a very large print run. So it means that you can do what you want to do on the back of the large American print run. What these other people do, for example, I mean, we have people we sell regularly to in Thailand, in South Africa, and so on. These people cannot, like us, afford to do it all on their own. They've got to do it with somebody. And so all those people will come past you and say, hello, I'm from South Africa. I would like some of those books, but I only want 1,000 of them. Well, 1,000 of them is not sufficient. But if you're already printing from America, then clearly you can add 1,000 onto that. And they know perfectly well that they can't ask for any changes in that because the numbers that they're producing or up buying are too small. And also the amount of money they can afford to pay for those books is far lower because it's a developing world country. And I like developing world countries, so I'm very keen on trying to assist with that. But what you have to do is realise you're not going to make very much money out of many of those markets. On the other hand, you make lots of contacts. The people that I work with in South Africa now, and who buy all of our stuff, mostly if it's science and maths, something like that, they know lots of other people because they go around to Canada and America and so on. And so I can get to meet them. And that way you find out about other people who might be able to help you. So certainly the next step of going and having a booth at Frankfurt was important. And I started off by explaining that this morning we got the Ministry of Education from Vietnam come past. They couldn't have come past if I didn't have a booth down the end by the front door. You know, they wouldn't have found me. So that is the sort of contact that you can't make by going out to somewhere because you wouldn't know who they were or what they were trying to do. They come past you, they come past with an interpreter, and you know, we've had a great conversation, we're going to carry on with that next time. So getting a booth is important insofar as you then can get other contacts. But you do need to put, in a trade situation, you need to put up your material because you're not, as you will be here, selling to the general population. You're actually selling to other major companies or minor companies, and they just want to see that you can do what you do and will it fit into their list in my particular case. So just to go back to Grolier, having got into this this order with Grolier, and it was successful, and we sold 2 million copies with Grolier. So that's the sort of scale of thing that can suddenly happen if you can get it into America. And it's exactly the same market as the lady who was my predecessor up here was talking about. The American library market is immense. It's also very profitable, but it's something it's quite hard to get into. If you get into it, then it's good news. I mean, it's less good news now than it used to be 10 years ago, but it's good news all the same. So through Grolier, and because the book sold so well, what the sales force came up to me and said was, look, we've sent all of our, this is the American Grolier sales force, they said, we've sent all of our children through college based on selling your books, this set of science books. They said, what else can you do? And I said, well, I've done them, that's it, you know. So there was a new CEO there, and the new CEO came in, and they were all trying to sort of figure this out. And he was literally new by about like 10 minutes or something. And he come in from Little Brown, and he sort of came round and he wandered round. And he said, what are you doing? He said, in my room. At least I'm in your room because these other people have put me there. And he said, so what are you doing? And I said, well, this, and because your sales force have said, I can't, you know, we need to sell more of this stuff. And he said, what do you do? Well, I said, I do boring and essential. He said, great, so do we. He said, now, do me all the elements. Now, if you thought 25 science books was hard work, try all the elements. We did do all the elements. We couldn't do them all as single books, but we did the first 20 odd as single books and then bundled the others together. So we now have the only set of books printed in elements in the world. And they, at the moment, currently are selling into many countries in different languages because nobody else does boring and essential. And it is a really key thing to understand. It's much more reliable than doing something which is frothy to do something which is boring and essential. And of course, Americans recognize British people and publishers as being able to do that. So they have a lot of confidence in Britain anyway, because Britain has a big publishing industry. So you're not going in there saying, in a sense, I'm nobody. You're going in there on the back of all the other successful British publishers that everybody knows produces all the stuff that Americans can sell better than the British, but can't necessarily make better than the British. And so we did all the elements, and we did other things for Grolier at the same time. And it was the elements, as I said at the beginning, that became known as the Harry Potter of the reference world, which is a little bit exaggerated because it didn't sell as well as Harry Potter. But all the same, it sold in the millions, and there are 20 odd of them. So it did very well. And then just to move on to the market as it then changed, because after that, of course, the internet came along, Wikipedia came along. Everybody thought that you could get everything for free, and it's taken about 7 or 8 years for them to discover that's not the case. But there was an enormous, great depression in the information book industry, and Grolier is a shadow of what it was. We had already diversified, and I think that's the other thing that's important. We have a foundation here in the UK education market. The national curriculum had come along, and so we produced all the textbooks for the national curriculum. Of course, we weren't alone in that, but our books are well regarded, and so we do well in that. So we have a base. So if America fails, goes down, or something goes wrong at some point, we have something to fall back on, to work on, or to take a long-term view, rather like the Germans do. They take a long-term view on what's going to work. So our long-term view was to change and become internet-oriented and to explain to people in America and elsewhere that the subscription website that we were going to offer was better than Wikipedia. And that's taken quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of time and a whole different group of contacts. I met somebody at Frankfurt again, because it really is the hub of what we do. I met somebody at Frankfurt who said, if you're going to do that, first of all, you're stupid, and secondly, critical mass, because the e-book people out there are saying, we do 2 million e-books, we do 3 million e-books. Well, of course they do, but I wouldn't want to read, for teaching purposes, I wouldn't want to read 2,999,900 of them. What teachers want in American schools is good-fashioned, boring, essential. So here we are doing good-fashioned, old-fashioned, boring, essential. And of course, we have it because we have the printed books already. So we put our printed books up, build on it with videos and so on. But it needs a whole new load of contacts. And so what we've been doing is building those contacts and increasing our critical mass. You'll see that, if you go past our stand, that I have up on the website at the moment the fact that we have 200,000 items up there. There is no getting away from the fact that if you're going to be in that market in America, or even in education, critical mass is important. They don't want to know if you haven't got a bit of everything that they want instantly available all the time. So we've had to take a long-term view for that particular part of the export market. It's a much more difficult part than the books were, but perhaps I didn't think that at the time. Perhaps this is just because this is a new piece of market and a new challenge for us to do. So we've moved our contacts, and the people we needed to get in touch with were American developers. We needed to get in touch. I've talked to all the ebook people and so on. But we actually find it's the same people again. It's still the same people like Grolier and the others who want our content, because they've been out there finding out how to make their stuff work in an internet environment as well. And we therefore have never had the problems that have been faced in logistics, which we were hearing earlier on, and which I was extremely impressed by, because I don't think I would have done all of that and got warehouses and other things. So I've been much better off working off the back of somebody else as a small company and doing what I do, which is be a small company. I wouldn't want to be a large company. We managed to keep the wolf from the door quite well doing that. And we now export about 2/3 of what we do. The internet site is growing at 50% a year and has done for the last 2 years. We couldn't possibly launch it before that because we didn't have the critical mass, so it doesn't have a long history. And now our challenge is how we convert 200,000 items into American English, because they won't want to read it in British English. So everything we now do is bigger than it used to be, but it's exactly the same in some other ways. So I hope that's been helpful in explaining how, if you're just a small company or an entrepreneur just trying to start, how all sorts of things go wrong, how it takes an awful lot of time, and how you've got to find, as it were, the right people. And I'm not a person who naturally goes out and networks. I really am not. I am somebody who sort of hides away from that. I don't do it. But when you discover that that's what you've got to do for your job, you jolly well get out there. You lie on the road, you take photographs of yellow lines in America with the stuff on the left-hand side, right-hand side, and you just get on with it and do it. And I think that's a very helpful thing to know. But I thought, watching earlier, the capital investment in what was involved in that was horrifically greater than mine. Mine is still dependent on other people in America. Mine is dependent on other big American companies turning around one day and saying, no, we don't want anything to do with you. So my essential requirement is to go more than the extra mile all the time, so that I am their preferred supplier all the time. And then they take most of the capital risk on it, not entirely, obviously, but they take a lot of the capital risk on it. And also they are Americans, so they understand it. And because they trust me, they'll come back and say, that won't work, you can't do that, no, we're not doing that. And also I spend time over in America being in amongst it and going into schools and saying, how'd you like this? And they say, we don't. And you say, well, what do we do then? You know, you do this. And that works best when you're a small company. You just wander about doing it and getting in amongst it. And from my point of view, I think having a large company to supply in the past has been a very valuable way of producing a large amount of export relative to me for the UK, and which continues to be successful.